I've heard of alcoholics experiencing missing time, but jumping forward in time? For God's sake, Miles, I think it's time to get some help. This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Visionary. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what that mysterious singularity orbiting the station is, and you're not enough of a Star Trek nerd to have correctly guessed what it is right away, be warned. Spoilers beyond this point. Theorizing that he could time travel within his own lifetime, Chief Miles O'Brien activated the radiation injector thingy and vanished. He awoke to find himself trapped in the future, but only about 3 hours into the future, facing a man in a bed whose image was exactly like his own, and driven by a well-known force, himself, to change history for the better. How did we get here? Well, we open on O'Brien waking up on the floor. He's just taken a nasty dose of radiation from an exploding conduit. Dr. Bashir thinks he'll be fine as long as he's assigned to light duty for a few days, and Sisko's like, great, because I've got enough on my hands, what with the Romulans arriving and all. Sisko and Kira head down to greet the arriving Romulan delegation, and on their way through the promenade, they see a drunken Klingon being dragged off by security. Sisko says to Odo, hey, I didn't know there were any Klingons here. Odo's like, they just got here, their ship was damaged, and they'll be around for a couple of days while they make repairs. Sisko's like, but I've got a bunch of Romulans arriving in a few minutes to receive an intelligence briefing about the Dominion. We've got to keep these Klingons and the Romulans from crossing paths. You know how much they hate each other. Romulans and Klingons on the station at the same time, and Sisko anxious about keeping them away from each other? Sounds like the perfect setup for one of Deep Space Nine's detested, lighthearted farces. Not detested by me. I love them. Bring on the laughs, Deep Space Nine. The Romulans, named Ruan and Karina, arrive. Sisko and Kira welcome them aboard, but these Romulans have no time for their soft Federation and Bajoran pleasantries. They're here for intelligence, and intelligence is what they shall have. While Sisko and Kira deal with that, we check in on O'Brien, who is trying and failing to convince Quark of the value of having a dartboard at the bar. O'Brien's explaining how you're not supposed to just fling the darts in the general direction of the board 3 at a time. You're supposed to take careful aim and toss them in a controlled manner, like this. But just as O'Brien is about to demonstrate the proper method of dart throwing, there's a flash of light, and suddenly he finds himself on the upper level of the promenade, looking across at the upstairs entrance to Quark's, and at himself, talking to Quark about how the Klingons wrecked one of the holosuites. Quark leaves, and that O'Brien looks over and sees the first O'Brien. Then another flash, and O'Brien's back in Quark's, having just thrown the dart for a bullseye. Nice throw. He collapses and is taken to the infirmary, where Bashir chalks everything that happened up to the radiation poisoning. His vision of himself talking to Quark, just a hallucination. Nothing to worry about. Cut to Sisko and Kira briefing the Romulans, and they are just not satisfied with the information they are getting. Karina's like, you said the Dominion is ruled by shapeshifters. Your chief of security is one of those shapeshifters. Why don't we just torture him and find out what he knows? Kira's like, that would be a waste of time. Odo doesn't know anything about the Dominion. He's a petty fascist, not a large-scale fascist. The Romulans remind Sisko that they've allowed him to use one of their cloaking devices on the Defiant, and in exchange, they want to see every scrap of intelligence that Starfleet has gathered about the Dominion. Sisko's like, fine, I'll have to talk to my boss, but whatever. Meanwhile, O'Brien is walking along on the upper level of the promenade when he runs into Quark, who starts complaining about the Klingons wrecking his holosuites, and holy shit, this is the conversation O'Brien saw in his hallucination. Only it wasn't a hallucination, because look over there, it's past O'Brien watching from the other side. He wasn't hallucinating, he was time traveling. A little. Dax confirms that O'Brien did actually do a bit of time traveling, and she thinks the radiation he was exposed to must have something to do with it. But as she starts to go on and on about it, O'Brien gets bored, so he does another time shift. This time, he's at Quark's in the middle of a big bar fight. Klingons, Romulans, Starfleet people, Bajorans, they're all throwing hands and chairs. O'Brien sees himself and helps himself out with an attacking Klingon, then flashes back and passes out again. Bashir warns that if O'Brien keeps time-shifting like this, it could kill him. But Dax is working super hard to find out what's causing it. Kira walks in like, "How you feeling, Chief?" "Well, I'm okay for the moment, but a little worried about..." "That's great. Commander, can I talk to you about these fucking Romulans for a second?" Kira and Sisko take a walk, and she explains that the Romulans want to debrief everyone who was on the Defiant that time it got captured by the Dominion, and have unrestricted access to the Defiant itself, and read everyone's personal logs and go through their underwear drawers. Sisko's like, "We'll let them do the first one and part of the second one. No personal logs." And they'd just be disappointed with our underwear drawers anyway. Dax's panties are way more conservative than most people assume. "How do you know?" "Let's focus on the Romulans. And when you talk to them in your debriefing, be nice." "I'm always nice." Cut to Kira screaming at a Romulan, "If you ever say some shit like that to me again, I'll feed you those fucking ears." Karina says, "Say, when the Founders captured the Defiant, you and Odo were the only members of the crew who weren't taken prisoner. Is there something going on between you two?" Kira's like, "What are you talking about?" And Ruan's like, "Does Odo want that? Does he want to get in there?" This interview is over. O'Brien and Bashir are playing darts at Quark's. O'Brien is convinced that bar fight he saw in his last time jump is going to break out at any moment, but Bashir tells him they've beefed up security and Quark has banned the Klingons, so there's no way it's going to happen now. Then some drunk Klingons stagger down the stairs from the holosuites. A cheerfully corrupt Quark explains that they paid him triple to let them in, and the fight commences just as O'Brien saw. While that's going on, Odo and Kira are in the security office, and Kira's like, "Those Romulans asked me if you wanted this? Like, if you wanted to get in here? Have you ever heard anything so ridiculous?" "Ridiculous. I wouldn't touch you with a 10-inch penis," which I could have at a moment's notice, but that's neither here nor there. They get a call about the fight at Quark's and run over to break it up. O'Brien time shifts again. This time he sees himself opening a panel in a corridor and gets zapped by a phaser beam. The blast knocks him down, and when the time-shifted O'Brien approaches to check for a pulse, he realizes that he's dead. Oh shit, it's not a farce episode, it's an O'Brien encounters his own dead body episode. Which is even better! When O'Brien shifts back, he tells everyone what happened this time, and Odo checks out that wall panel. But he doesn't find any booby traps, which means it hasn't been booby-trapped yet. But it will be soon, because O'Brien's time shifts seem to be sending him about 5 hours into the future each time. Odo sets up surveillance on that wall panel. Meanwhile, Dax has figured out why O'Brien is time shifting. There's a singularity orbiting the station. She can't pinpoint where it came from or why it's here, but the singularity is activating the radiation O'Brien absorbed to send him forward in time, which is just a thing that happens, as we all know. Dax works on trying to nail down that singularity. Bashir and O'Brien head to the infirmary, where Bashir is going to try and neutralize the radiation O'Brien absorbed to stop his time shifting, and Sisko drops in on Odo to see how the surveillance of that wall panel is going. Nobody has shown up on the security camera Odo has installed in that corridor, but somebody did just use a low-power transporter to beam a device into that wall. The Romulans have been assigned quarters in that section, so it's probable that whoever beamed in the device is targeting them. Odo suspects the Klingons, but he's investigating everybody, including the Bajarans and Quark. Sisko's like, "You're investigating Quark?" "I always investigate Quark. It's our love language." Bashir and O'Brien are at Quark's having a drink. Bashir notes that this is around the time O'Brien saw himself killed by the booby-trapped wall panel. O'Brien's like, "Don't remind me. I feel like someone walked over my grave. And it was me." O'Brien undergoes another time shift. This time, he's standing in a dark room in the back of the infirmary. There's a body on a table covered by a sheet. O'Brien pulls back the sheet, and it's him. Holy shit, it's an O'Brien encounters his own dead body twice episode. I have to admire the wanton cruelty the writers of this show inflict on O'Brien. It's like they were sitting around planning out this season and they said, "We should do another O'Brien Must Suffer show. What have we not subjected him to yet?" And someone said, "Have we had him find his own corpse twice?" And they were like, "Nope, let's do that." Remember, kids, if you want to be a writer, don't coddle your characters. Take a lesson from how the writers of Deep Space Nine treat O'Brien and fuck him up bad. Anyway, Bashir walks in like, "Oh, hey, time-shifted Miles, am I glad to see you? As you can see, you're dead. I didn't detect the cause until I performed the autopsy." "Autopsy?" Yeah, I just finished it. It's a shame you didn't get here a bit earlier. You could have seen what it looked like when I was all up in your guts in a forensically pathological way. Bashir tells O'Brien that the radiation fucked up his brain in some kind of very technical way, and that when he shifts back to his own time frame, he should find Bashir and get him to do a scan to look for that damage so that O'Brien doesn't die this time. O'Brien's like, cool, thanks, best friend doctor who let me die, and he time shifts back. O'Brien tells Bashir about the brain damage thing, and Bashir repairs it, and everything seems to be getting back to normal. Odo arrests some Klingons for tampering with that wall panel. O'Brien's treatments are proceeding, and he's almost completely free of that radiation. Dax still hasn't figured out where the singularity came from, but whatever, you can't have everything, you know? Then, during a meeting in Ops, O'Brien time shifts again. This time, he's on a runabout during an evacuation of the station. The other O'Brien tells him that he doesn't know what happened, but he woke up in the middle of the night after a massive explosion rocked the station. The evacuation alarm sounded, so he herded as many people as he could onto this runabout and left. As he's talking, the station is blown to smithereens. Then the wormhole closes with a flash of light, so I guess that's fucked too. Back in the present, O'Brien warns the others about what he just saw. Sisko resolves to take every possible precaution to prevent the station from being destroyed, but without knowing specifically what's going to happen, there's only so much they can do. O'Brien has an idea. He asks Bashir to dose him with more of that radiation, to trigger a time shift on purpose. If they measure the dosage precisely and adjust the frequency of the blah 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 who gives a fuck, they can control how far into the future he jumps. So they do that. Bashir gives O'Brien a thingy to wear on his arm that injects him with the radiation. He just has to inject himself again when it's time to come back. But he can't take too long because his body will be flooded with radiation and he'll need treatment as soon as possible. O'Brien says to Bashir, in case something goes wrong and I don't make it, there's a letter in my quarters for Keiko, telling her to move on with her life and find some new man to love. Bashir's like, I think she's way ahead of you on that one. So O'Brien activates the radiation device and jumps a few hours into the future and finds himself asleep in bed. He wakes himself up and tells himself about the station being destroyed soon, and his other self, I'll call this one Pajamas O'Brien for the sake of clarity. Pajamas O'Brien says, damn, dude, you don't look good. O'Brien says, yeah, I had to take a big dose of radiation to come here, and I've still got to take another one to get back so I can warn everybody once I find out why the station gets destroyed. Pajamas O'Brien says, hang on, if you're me from the past and you have radiation sickness, shouldn't I have it too? Also, shouldn't I remember waking myself up? Because I'm you? I know, it doesn't make sense, I hate it too, but let's go to Ops and find out what's going on before I die, okay? O'Brien and Pajamas O'Brien get to Ops just in time to witness the station being attacked by a Romulan warbird. Where'd it come from? That's what the mysterious singularity was. As Pajamas O'Brien explains, Romulan ships use a singularity to power their warp drive. That's what Dax was detecting, and that's what was interacting with the radiation to cause the time shifts. But O'Brien is too weak from the radiation to make the jump back to his own time. He hands the injector thingy to Pajamas O'Brien and says, you go. Pajamas is like, but I don't belong there. O'Brien says, it's only 3 hours ago, not a parallel universe, for fuck's sake. We're the same person. Now go before you see yourself dead for the third time. Pajamas O'Brien does the time shift and tells everyone about the Romulans, and Sisko, Kira, Odo, and some security goons walk in during Ruan and Karina's interrogation of Quark, and Sisko's like, your history. We know about your cloaked warbird orbiting the station, and we know all about your plan to collapse the wormhole to prevent the Dominion from coming through and destroying Deep Space Nine at the same time to kill all the potential witnesses. Well, it ain't gonna happen thanks to the heroic efforts of our Chief of Operations, Miles Pajamas O'Brien. Now get the fuck off my space station! Later, O'Brien and Bashir are playing darts at Quark's, and O'Brien is still a bit out of sorts. Because he's the O'Brien from a few hours in the future, he remembers playing this darts game with Bashir. He even predicts what Bashir is going to throw next. Bashir says, look, man, you're still you. There's only one Chief O'Brien, and the only difference is that you jumped back in time a little bit. So you have a few extra memories. You get a good night's sleep tonight, and you'll be good as new. O'Brien's like, yeah, you're right. Good night, folks. The end. You know, for as grim as this one gets, what with the multiple O'Brien beholds his own cadaver scenes, the overall impression is of a fairly lightweight, undemanding episode. Visionary includes some dark beats, but everything is handled so nimbly and it's so well put together that it winds up being kind of fun. It's definitely among the most fun of the O'Brien Must Suffer episodes. We enter the story with events already in motion. O'Brien is waking up from the accident that gave him his radiation dose, so we're drawn into the story right away. And as the plot continues to unfold, we're mostly allowed to see what's going on and figure it out for ourselves, rather than being clubbed over the head with exposition. There is a little bit of exposition, as well as a few doses of technobabble, but nothing load-bearing as far as the narrative goes. O'Brien's predicament is easy to understand. I enjoy the way the time shifts are used not only to show us what's going to happen in the future, but also to gradually reveal things to us about the nature of the time shifts themselves. For example, the first time O'Brien sees himself talking to Quark on the promenade, it's not immediately clear that he has time traveled. That doesn't become obvious until he lives the events he witnessed during the time shift from the other side. Then, when he shifts into the bar fight, he doesn't just watch things happen, he actively participates, which establishes that during a time shift he can physically interact with the events and affect what's going on. Then, following subsequent shifts, we see him returning to the present and warning others about what he witnessed and the events he saw, himself getting shot by the phaser in the wall panel, himself dead in the infirmary, are prevented from happening. Once that is established, it follows naturally for O'Brien to decide to take control of the time shifts to prevent the station from being destroyed. Every time shift tells us something new about what's happening to O'Brien personally and what's happening to the station as a whole. The time shifts also gradually raise the stakes as the episode goes on, culminating in the potential destruction of the entire station. That gives both O'Brien's story and the larger story a sense of direction, and keeps the time shifting from feeling like a gimmick. The time shifting is a gimmick, and isn't it convenient that O'Brien's radiation exposure just so happens to have an amazing side effect that enables him to prevent the Romulans from blowing up the station? But that gimmick is deployed skillfully enough that it doesn't detract from the episode. That, to me, is good writing. The star of the episode is obviously Colm Meaney, who reminds us what a valuable player he is to this series. It's often been said, and it bears repeating, that O'Brien is as close as Star Trek gets to having an everyman as a regular character. O'Brien isn't quite an everyman. Like all Star Trek heroes, he's incredibly skilled and intelligent, but he has a more human, relatable, down-to-earth quality that makes him a perfect choice to be the protagonist of a story where he's being yoinked back and forth through time for reasons which don't become clear until near the end. O'Brien responds to his time-shifting adventures with a mixture of confusion, annoyance, and fear, and Meaney handles all of that with no visible effort. He also reminds us that for all of his everyman qualities, O'Brien is ultimately a courageous and selfless hero. He offers to time shift intentionally in order to prevent the destruction of the station, knowing that taking that much radiation might kill him. He says it's a risk he's willing to take to save the lives of everyone else. And he means it. You're a good man, Miles O'Brien. The two significant guest stars in this one are Jack Shearer and Annette Held as the Romulans Ruan and Karina, respectively. They do a good job portraying typical Romulans, demanding assholes who are clearly up to something. I find nothing wrong with their performances, but unfortunately, I think the Romulan-centered material is the weakest part of the episode. Kira's interrogation is fun, beginning with her yelling at them and ending with her getting offended at the suggestion that Odo might be hot for her, but most of the Romulan stuff feels too mechanical, present to provide a reason why O'Brien is time-shifting and present a threat for him to resolve. Which is good in theory, the story needs that, but there's a lot of dryly procedural business related to the Romulans, including Odo's investigation into that booby-trapped wall panel that I honestly could not give less of a fuck about. It needs to be there, or something like it needs to be there, but watching those parts of the episode, I was less than captivated. I wouldn't call it a major flaw, though. It's not as if those scenes are unwatchable. I just find myself waiting to get back to Chief O'Brien, because that's the part that I'm really interested in. Well, that and the jokes. The episode has a nice sense of humor about itself, which also helps to take the edge off of the number of times the hero finds himself next to his own lifeless carcass. Odo has two very funny bits. First, when he feigns indignation when Kira tells him about the Romulans suggesting that Odo was attracted to her, and then later when Sisko asks why he's investigating Quark for the booby-trapped wall panel, and Odo replies, as though it's the most obvious thing in the world, "I always investigate Quark." There's also a funny bit between the two O'Briens when O'Brien time shifts into the future and gets his future self out of bed. I made fun of it a little in my plot summary, but the way it actually goes is that future O'Brien asks why he doesn't have radiation sickness if his past self overdosed on radiation in order to time shift, and they both shake their heads and simultaneously groan, "I hate temporal mechanics." It's not only a funny beat, it's also an example of one of my favorite writing techniques, which is using humor to slide past a rough patch in the plot. Because Pajamas has a point there. O'Brien's intentional time shift in this scene operates differently than the others. During his previous shifts, the future version of O'Brien recognized his past self and remembered experiencing these events from that perspective. But when O'Brien wakes himself up, his future self seems to have no recollection of doing this in the past. And also, he has no radiation sickness. And right now, some of you might be saying, but Steve, that makes sense if you think about it once you get to the end of the episode, because the O'Brien who time shifts into the future this time doesn't go back. It's the O'Brien from the future who goes back. And Bashir says he only has a tiny amount of radiation in his body, and that explains why he doesn't have radiation sickness when his past self wakes him up. Here's the thing. That explains the lack of radiation sickness, but it doesn't explain Pajamas O'Brien not remembering these events and not knowing what's going on. He goes back to a few hours in the past and stays there. So shouldn't he still remember this happening to him before? It still doesn't make any goddamn sense. I'm sure if I sat down and really thought it through, I could come up with something that would explain everything, but I'm also sure it would be extremely technical and tedious, and thank Christ the writers of this episode didn't bother with any of that and just covered it with a joke and moved on. Once again, that's what I call good writing. Speaking of which, Visionary was written by John Shirley from a story by Ethan H. Kalk and directed by Reza Badi. Shirley and Kalk were first-time Star Trek writers. Shirley was primarily a novelist and short story writer who had written a bit for film and a few animated shows, and was hired to write the teleplay for this one by his friend, series showrunner Ira Steven Behr. Kalk would go on to co-write the story for another time travel episode of Deep Space Nine, Children of Time. Reza Badi directed a total of 5 Deep Space Nine episodes, including 2 of my favorites, Civil Defense and the first half of the classic 2-parter, Past Tense. Visionary is the perfect episode for when you feel like watching some Star Trek, but you're not looking for anything too heavy, and you're not trying to get dragged into a binge watch. You just want an enjoyable show with some decent jokes and a solid sci-fi gimmick that builds to a satisfying resolution without getting too complicated. My interest starts to wane a bit when the nuts and bolts holding the thing together become too apparent, but before too long, attention shifts once again to our ever-reliable hero, and I'm right back in it. That Chief O'Brien, he really can fix anything. Those are my thoughts on Visionary. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me next time as this batch of reviews of episodes featuring time loops and paradoxes concludes with a look at an episode from the first season of Star Trek Voyager titled Time and Again. See you next time for that. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.